Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 124 of the Citrix Session. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. 124, guys, that's a lot of numbers. We have to apologize. We've been MIA for a while, since like mid-December. Life happens, right?
Life does happen. Lots of things in life have happened. Yep.
Yes, it does.
So that was the voice of Geremy Meyers. Geremy, how's it going?
I'm doing excellent. It's been a fun Christmas, fun kickoff to the year. It's been exciting. And here we are.
So guess what? I missed everything you just said because I'm dumb enough to change my audio devices right in the middle of a podcast.
Well, I don't want to oversell what I just said. I just basically said it's been busy. We've been good. It's been a fun start of the year.
Give us, tell us what your new role is at Cloud Software Group, which is the new company that Citrix.
It is the new company. So I have a similar role. So first and foremost, you nailed it, right? Cloud Software Group. In fact, Andy, I'm going to need you to send the invite for the podcast now to a new email address. So it's actually cloud.com. In fact, looking back, that might be the only thing that remains of that acquisition a few years ago. I don't know if you remember, but we acquired the software that was a cloud platform. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
So we ended up spinning that off several years ago. And the one thing
by the way, that wasn't a bad idea. It was
a great idea.
It's a great idea. It's just there's a lot of things to execute, and the cloud has happened, and in the architecture behind it's happened, and but the cloud.com came out of it. That could be the most valuable thing 20 years from now.
That is usually what I lead presentations off with. I'm like, hey, listen, so I'm so-and-so at cloud.com. Yeah, we somehow finagled that domain name, right? Which is pretty awesome. But so we're Cloud Software Group now, and I manage a team of partner technical strategists. So that is a fancy way of saying partner sales engineers, essentially. And we work directly with partners like XenTegra, not just sort of educating them, letting them know what's new, but getting very involved in their opportunities. So we are less customer focused, or at least engaged, I guess I should say, than in the past. And our big focus is really working directly with the XenTegras to just be successful. That's what our goal is. We're successful if they're successful. So, you're successful.
That's what XenTegra was built to be, is this conduit between the customer and the vendor. But that doesn't mean you're like not going to talk to customers. You're going to talk to us, like us and you are going to talk to customers.
Exactly.
And at the end of the day, it's a scalable, better approach. In fact, the blog we're going to talk about today came from another partner that is helping customers solve problems with Citrix, and let's talk about it, right? That's okay. It's all ships rise. This desktop as a service world, it hasn't hit its mark yet. It's got a lot of legs left on it to get to where it should go.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. In fact, so I got my first call this afternoon with one of the AEs at XenTegra, and we're going to talk about adaptive auth and DaaS premium and kind of what that looks like for a customer, and eventually we'll turn that into some kind of demo, actually. So.
I love that. That was great. Actually, you said that, and you didn't say VDI. I love the fact you didn't say VDI, because digital workspace is part of a current and future and ongoing digital transformation. I mean, we could be 140 years old still talking about this thing. It never ends.
We probably will.
Yeah. Yes, we will. Guaranteed.
Yeah, we will.
As a guy who's turning 50 in a couple months.
Oh my. Okay, I'll remember that.
Well, there'll be a party. I'm planning my own party. I started planning it yesterday. Bill Sutton, what's been going on since mid-December?
Oh, life, holidays, trips, kickoff, all good.
It's hard to believe.
I know it is, really is a lot.
I gotta go back and check. That was with Chris Fleck, was our last one. I can't believe that was a month ago.
Was it? By the way, did he show up? Was he a part of kickoff when you 2 weeks ago? Was it?
I talked to Chris this morning, and he showed up, and it was great to have his, legacy and his awareness of what's kind of happened and what's coming back around on the Citrix side, and how they're going to lead with, technology and solving problems and partner with partners. And then we were also fortunate enough to have Mark Templeton come to kind of help us close the sessions out, and him being part of us and what we're doing, and part of our guiding shining light in the beginning and even today around what it means to be able to add value and be successful while still being humble and having a purpose. It was awesome.
I love Chris Fleck, and I love kind of what he brings to the table. It reminds me of a synergy we did a few years ago where we had just acquired OctoBlue. I don't know if you guys remember that company, but it was very much if this, then that, kind of workflow driven, which may be a little bit of ahead of its time, based on what we're doing. But the idea is, you walked into a room, you had Alexa sitting there, and you would say, "Hey, Alexa, start my meeting," and it would kick a workflow off that would start, at the time, go to meeting. Then it would say, "Hey, save this recording. Hey, Alexa, save this recording to whatever." On the back end, it would go through and grab something in the recording, dump it to share file, send a link out to everyone that was in the meeting. It was just like the forward-thinking kind of stuff. You didn't know that's what a workspace looked like. And to be honest, we spitball things. Some things stuck, some things didn't. I think that's just kind of what you try when you're trying to innovate. But man, just some of the stuff that guy's brought to Citrix over the years has been pretty amazing. The X1 mouse, if you remember that, of course. The Raspberry Pi was kind of, I think, his brainchild originally. So lots of good things.
Yeah, and there's gonna be more of that, applying tech, and some of it won't work, but then there's a lot of applying concepts to the existing technologies within those technologies and things that may or may not hit a home run. But it won't be like, trying to reinvent the wheel. It'll be applying to the DaaS and digital workspace world things that are the obvious no-brainer next things in the fold. All right. So, Geremy, you picked today's blog, and based on what's here in the opening paragraphs, 2 of them, what is this and why does it matter? Well, let me read the title. The right start to architecting an efficient DaaS, desktop as a service environment. And this is by Kapil Singh, who we believe to be a architect at Wipro, however you want to say it.
Oh, he does. In fact, I guess it's right here in the second paragraph. He leads R&D within their practice, actually, within their VDI practice.
So why did you pick this one? Why do you think we should be talking about this one today?
So it covers a lot of just really architecture thought questions you should be asking yourself. So, I've done a lot of POCs over the years, and, I can't tell you how many times it's turned into, let's just jump right in and start building things, which, by the way, I love. Don't get me wrong. I love building technology. I love spinning up things in Azure and all these different locations and really making the technology work. But when you're designing a production ready environment, there's some things that you need to consider. And this article really hits some of those bullets on what you should be thinking through if you're not doing already in any of your projects. So, I thought this resonated. Obviously this is something that, probably hits the blogs once a year, maybe once every couple of years, and it's worth revisiting.
It always worth discussing, and I can't begin to tell you. I'll do this real quick, and I think Bill would agree to this. Citrix Consulting did a major favor for all of us by coming up with these methodologies back in the day, and Bill and I used those same methodologies around how to architect solutions and how to do the discovery and stuff in all of our projects. Bill, what was that class? What was the certification we got?
It was Think Like a Consultant or Consulting Services. I forget the name of it, but it was the online course that Citrix offered as part of the Citrix service or Citrix provider program as part of CCS.
Yeah,
I think it was Think Like a Consultant or Act and Think Like a Consultant or something like that. And then there was another course on consulting methodologies.
Yeah, to this day, and I wish I still had the little book, like the little exam cram book I had for that. It was so succinct about how it tried to help you understand the mindset of a consultant and making sure you went through the proper phases, even though, like Geremy talked about, you just can't wait to get in and start implementing stuff. That never goes right. I put up closet doors yesterday, and I drilled 2 holes in my fingers. That's one of my problems. I drilled all the way through to my hand twice.
Oh my.
And I also didn't look at the instructions and didn't follow the instructions in the right order. And I made 2 major mistakes. It required putty and paint to kind of hide my mistakes. But all that applies no matter what you're doing in life. I so hope that I can get my kids to go through something like that at some point and use that for, their job as well as even personal stuff. Okay, we're gonna never get through this if I don't force us to. The first section is a well-defined assessment of requirements. Now, this is project, pilot, POC, POV. No matter what you're doing, finding out what the customer, what the end user, the consumer maybe not the end user, but maybe definitely the end user, but the people in the middle as well, what they're trying to cover. Bill, this is your baby. This is your area. You want to run through the first one?
Yeah,
Is user.
First, what I would do is go back slightly to the first paragraph, and the last sentence there is really key indicates it all. A purpose-built DaaS architecture that fits the needs of a business and technology is the answer. And what I mean by purpose-built is, this is not a one-size-fits-all proposition in 95% of the cases. It needs to be to some degree customized, and part of getting to that customization is having adequate discovery / assessment. And that's what this first section covers. And it's kind of interesting in looking through this when we selected it, that it really is aligned very closely with what we do on the majority of our implementation projects at XenTegra. We follow a methodology that was championed by Citrix that essentially involves an assessment / discovery upfront. And we do things like, what this says. The first one here is users.
Hey, Bill,
yep.
you brought something up, made me think, and I want to bring this up real quick.
Sure.
True or false? Most of our customers' physical desktops environments happened organically, or they were well thought out.
Organically,
right? And so the challenge here is, as we start to move this stuff into a deliver as a service, we ain't got time to worry about. We don't have time for organic to happen, right? We got to hit it pretty close the first time or the second time or the third time. We don't have 30 years of evolution. Most of your customers' desktop solutions are 20 plus years of evolving organically. We don't have time to do that when we're do it as a service, right?
We have to make time.
Well, we don't have time for it to happen organically. We
don't have time for it to happen organically. We have to plan for it. We have to design it properly.
And most of my seniors, when I talk to executives, it's just desktops, guys. Just make it happen. Like, no, it's not just desktops. It's as a service delivered, centralized app computing in world, aka digital workspace, which happens to be the desktop. You can't afford to get it wrong, because once we get one or two bad experiences, they'll never let us try this again.
That's exactly right.
It's like cars. I mean, you don't show up at a dealership and go, "Hey, it's just cars, y'all. Just pick one and go." You go, "No, listen, I'm a mom. I've got 3 kids. Let's talk through what my requirements are, right? I might be single with plenty of cash to burn. Hey, that's a different scenario, right? You got to kind of understand, where that end user is coming from, and that's essentially what we're doing here. We're really just trying to understand what your requirements are. I can tell you, my wife wants 14 cup holders. Why? Because we have 4 kids and we need 14 cup holders. This is how it works.
And you can't have a Volvo if you want big cup holders. Volvos don't have cup holders, but Toyota Highlanders do. That's why I have a Toyota Highlander.
Right. But, listen, my daughter's 13. She's going to be 16, 17 here in a few years. And, maybe in 4 or 5 years, safety is a bigger concern. And then maybe it's a Volvo. But I don't know. She's a teenager. She ain't getting a Volvo.
So I'll make this super quick. One of our business partners in an SMB joint venture, Mark Vincent, he's talking about, he's got kids that range from almost 30 down to 15 or 16. And his oldest kids drove like muscle cars with manual transmissions. His youngest kid, he says he'll never have a gas combustion car. Like it's all electric. He'll never know anything different.
You might be right, actually. You might be right. Yep. First of all, he's not driving a manual because it's hard to find. And then secondly, by the time he's buying his first car, I can promise you it'll probably be electric.
Yeah. Well, you bought one. Like, it's electric, and he'll never drive probably gas, and is not interested. Okay, Bill, I'm sorry. I took you off topic. No. One of the objectives is to understand the who?
The users, the people that are going to use this solution. And some of the factors here they're listed here, but the condition of the network, whether they're in an office all day long working on the same device versus roaming, the customization, things like profiles and policies need to be considered. As well as the nature of the user. And, Citrix, I think, used to put them, and probably still does, into categories under knowledge worker, task worker, power user, and that still applies. But that's an important distinction to make when you're assessing the user requirements of a DaaS solution.
I feel like it's 1999 all over again. I mean, that hasn't changed.
That has not changed. No.
Yeah. That's why we call it end user computing. Our whole entire job in IT is to help users get their job done.
That's right.
So we should probably include them in what we're doing on the front side, not just at the end result.
Absolutely. And obviously the next one, application landscape, who are the owners of the apps? They're the ones that are going to have to, they need to be considered because they're the ones that are likely going to have to get them installed and configured in this this net new environment where they're hosted. Certainly the classification of the apps and who gets access to them is critical, obviously, in designing your group permission structure such that you're not throwing everybody into one group or assigning individual users to applications. You create a group-based structure where you add the user to the group and then the group gets added to the app. All of those are considerations when it comes to the application landscape, as well as obviously support for the operating systems you're going to deliver, obviously.
Well, in the operating systems, that first app you got to think about that's going to get you to all the other apps in the middleware as well as the endpoint. And, at some point, these all become SaaS apps. And why are we talking about desktops? We just need a digital workspace with a browser of some type. And that becomes our conduit. We don't need a desktop anymore. But Geremy, any thoughts on these first two?
From a user perspective, I think the one I've seen a lot more recently than I have in the past is certainly geographical distribution. Maybe 3 years ago, we thought about just regional offices, but now it's, folks are working from home, they're working, hybrid. And I don't mean just salespeople, but just regular Joes who do any sort of job in an organization. So you have to consider that, and usually what that means is you got to consider the network conditions as well. I think we've always talked about personalization, and I get all that, but man, it's interesting the number of conversations I've gotten into just around where my users sit, what we can expect out of the network. It's always been a thing, but it's really just become more recently. But, in some cases, the application landscape drives that as well. So, I mean, if you have very graphically intense applications, that is going to impact your user experience, So now you might want to deliver 3D CAD, but you might not be doing it to certain locations. You've got to have the bandwidth to support it, but you wouldn't know that unless you went through this exercise.
And unified communication apps. I'm embarrassed to say I'm not using my virtual desktop right now, but I have in the past. And if that's important, which it is to almost everybody these days, man, that's got to be one of the apps you talk about.
In fact, it's got to be one of the biggest ones these days. In fact, so Teams, Zoom, WebEx are three of the ones that pop up all the time. And those get a little bit easy just from a deployment perspective because there's special plugins for them. But it's not unusual for us to get asked about, just a third-party app I've never heard of that does UC. Yeah. And so how do you factor that in? It's important to know that going up front because that might define things like roaming or static. It might define, how much resource you can actually give a virtual desktop. Yeah. It's very interesting. The other thing I'll say about the application landscape is, in a lot of cases, you talked about physical desktops and how organically they've grown and how all the apps, just any app you can think of ends up on a physical desktop. When you're in that scenario of moving that into a DaaS environment, I say DaaS because some of these are going to be SaaS, of course, but moving into a DaaS environment, a lot of organizations look at that opportunity to rationalize the apps. So you guys can both remember back in the day when you would just get a list of apps that would hit your desktop that included 14 versions of Adobe Acrobat and for whatever reason, the CD writing software. That had to be in the virtual desktop. You go, what's the use case for that? Well, not really. It was just a dump from some tool on the endpoint. I get that. But a lot of organizations, they take this opportunity to actually rationalize the apps that need to go in this DaaS environment. So, the first two are huge in terms of just defining what you're delivering as a service.
Yep. I have so many things I would love to talk about, but I'm going to keep us moving on because we'll never get there. I will say this, Bill and I just got out of our management meeting every Monday morning. I think we spent 20 minutes talking about endpoints that we wanted to, and we do this stuff for a living and we use digital workspaces, yet we had to spend 20, 30 minutes on today's call figuring out which laptop models we were going to buy. Bill, go ahead and hit this next one.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And, endpoint types is another objective that you need to consider. And obviously, the operating system is a big part of that, but form factors fit as well. I mean, whether you're talking about, a tablet or a laptop or a physical desktop that's being used today. But, this kind of dovetails into the other two, the location of your users and to a larger degree, what Geremy was bringing up, which is the concept of the application landscape. Do we need to provide these users that have a Windows or a Mac device? Do they need a desktop delivered to them, or do they just need apps delivered to them, or SaaS apps delivered to them? Certainly, understanding the endpoint type as in conjunction with the other two items helps drive the answer to those questions.
Yeah. So, Bill, the next one on the list is printing or printer and other peripheral requirements. They told me 10 years ago people wouldn't be printing by now. Are you telling me people still have to print?
People still have to print. Yes, they do. That's a key item. We have that in our SAL specifically called out. But the other peripherals are probably becoming more. They're not less important, but they're certainly equally as important. Things like webcams, microphones, in consideration of what was said earlier around Teams, unified communication applications like Teams or Zoom or WebEx, et cetera. Obviously, those devices. And if you start looking at an industry where it says here industry specific hardware like healthcare, then you're looking at things like pin pads, signature pads, maybe other types of medical devices that send telemetry somewhere. Maybe those need to be connected to a desktop. Maybe they need to be on a physical desktop that's specialized or dedicated to them. But those are things that all need to be considered as part of designing a solution for your customer.
Yeah, Geremy, anything these last two that you want to highlight?
Well, first of all, I want to ask a question. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different endpoint types, Andy. Windows, Mac OS, iOS, Android, Linux, Chrome OS. How many of those do you own and tinker with?
Well, I mean, as we're going through this, I literally had to go around and touch some of them in my office because it's time for them to get updated. My Chrome OS is right here. My Windows is right here. It also boots into a Linux OS. I've got an IGEL LG all-in-one behind me. I mean, I got 4 of them plus a phone as I'm standing here right now.
Yeah, I think as an IT professional, someone who's in the EUC space, and not you specifically, but just anyone in this space, I mean, I think you gotta own all these things and you gotta test and tinker with them because you're not gonna know what they're capable of. I can just tell you, coming from a sales engineering perspective, the questions I'll get from customers saying, hey, can I do this thing? Can I do this whoop-de-doo with Mac OS in this scenario? I'm like, I got no idea. Let me pull the MacBook out. Let's give it a go. Because nothing surprises me anymore. I thought peripheral requirements were kind of going to go away because printing seemed to be the biggest one. As it turns out, it seems like it's all the multimedia stuff, like you mentioned, Bill. Can I get this 4K camera that does not ship with my laptop, but it's a Logitech, specifically to do stuff like this? Can I get that remoted in as a peripheral? Same thing for this high-end boom mic that I decided to get over COVID, right? So, it's pretty important to understand exactly, what the endpoints are capable of. Because the thing you'll find is, and this is specific to Citrix, is, we make a workspace app for everything, but you got to understand what is supported as well. So even though you want to do, maybe, video redirection like you do on Windows, but on Chrome OS, you got to understand it works differently. Yeah. So you got to understand what those limitations may or may not be.
But let's stop and highlight that standardization's happening, has happened. Citrix has all the workspace apps where they mostly do the same things if capable, if the endpoint's capable. And we've standardized on USB, thankfully, on a lot of things. And that this world that we're talking about right now is so much better than it was in the mid-2000s, where it was a crapshoot whether things would work or not. I think things are likely to work now, and that's Citrix has been the leader in that space and still is by far the leader in making sure that stuff you need, Mr. Implementation guy, Mr. Integrator, works more than likely.
Yep. More than likely. Mm-hmm.
All right, Bill, high availability concerns. My goodness, how many times have we talked about this on the podcast and other things in the last 2 years?
We've talked about it a lot, and we hear it a lot from customers. The ability to stay online in the event of an event. The challenge we run into here is a lot of customers want disaster recovery, and they'll say, I want to make sure that I develop or I build this environment sufficient so that I've got DR and BCP built in, business continuity planning built in from the standpoint of my VDI environment, if that's what they're building. The challenge we run into is a lot of times they will build it in the DR facility, but there's nothing else there except maybe a domain controller. So customers need to consider, and part of this exercise, you need to consider, okay, you want to build DR. What do you have in DR? What do you really need in DR? Do you need like for like? Do you need a degraded environment? These are all considerations that come up. And then obviously when you're dealing with the cloud, you're no longer really having to worry about the infrastructure components. The ability to deliver DR is much simpler. It's literally in the Citrix world, delivering some cloud connectors at each location and then orchestrating the connections to those through the cloud control plane. But fundamentally, it comes down to what do you want to deliver? how much degraded, if any, do you want a DR situation to be, and what do you already have in DR what do you need in DR, or what do you already have there that can, or other than your virtual desktops? Because I can give you a virtual desktop in DR. So if you have a disaster event, you can connect to your desktop, but if there's no data or no application, things that going on there, then I haven't really done much for you.
Yeah, I mean, I like to say that Citrix is kind of the easy part. You guys can tell me if I'm wrong, but Citrix is kind of the easy part, right? Like spinning up desktops in a second location in case of a disaster is not hard, but that backend infrastructure, I mean, how are you replicating your databases and all the, you're just thinking of a 3-tier environment, like what that looks like. How are you getting that over to your second location? You almost have to define what's a disaster. Like, what are you planning for?
Yep. Well, that kind of goes back to to really the overarching element is what is the overall objective of what the customer's trying to accomplish here in considering or implementing a solution like this, and certainly understanding what DR means to them and what their expectations are is equally as important.
So this to me goes back to the previous conversation around peripherals, and that was a 2000 generation conversation. Now high availability. Geremy, your comment was you tell me if we're wrong. We were supposed to tell you if you're wrong. Citrix is the easy part. Well, it is today because
it is.
The platform as a service model 5 years ago, and even in some of our clients who haven't adopted platform as a service, it's still a hard conversation. But if you adopt platform as a service, couple connectors, maybe not even that, Citrix is the easy part.
It absolutely is today. It is very easy.
Yep.
So
particularly in a DaaS model.
This next one, I think we'll just skip it, right? Security, nobody cares, right?
It's made up just for budget. That's all.
Well, I will throw this out, and I talk to people, sometimes argue with people weekly. I'm a desktop as a service guy. I'm a digital workspace guy. I believe security starts with a non-persistent delivered compute environment, a desktop or apps or SaaS with analytics. That's where security starts for me. I'm not monitoring and threat analysis and all that. That's important, absolutely important. But if you tell me I'd reboot my desktop back to a gold image every time and whatever bad stuff I might have got on it is now gone, that's where I believe it starts. And we have multiple customers. We've gone in and looked at their environment post ransomware, and the only thing left standing was the non-persistent desktop environment. Bill?
Absolutely right. The other thing I would add to that is a secure browser. Is a browser that can be centrally managed, whether the device is centrally managed or not, that the users must use to access secure or line of business SaaS-based apps. That's another consideration when you start driving around security. I mean, obviously they've named a lot of items here like PCI, HIPAA, high tech, and so forth. Those are all things that need to be considered, but you need to understand which ones apply and those that don't apply to the individual customer at issue here. And a lot of that is just going to involve discussing with their security team and other folks in the organization to address those needs.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are kind of two buckets here, right? So there is the bucket of compliance, right? So there's things that you must turn on or turn off or manage because you're in a certain industry and you're regulated by certain, security regulations here, right? So PCI, HIPAA, those are healthcare, credit card transaction, things like that. So that's one aspect of it. And the second aspect of it is just risk to the business, right? I mean, no one wants to go buy antivirus, but they buy it because it reduces that risk footprint to the business. And so, just understanding what that risk is, because you can't turn it all on. There's not enough budget to turn everything on. But understanding what the risk is, getting in front of the right teams, within the organization to understand that. Luckily, there's a lot of knobs and switches within Citrix to cover a lot of bases, but we don't cover everything. So you also need to understand how what we do layers in with the rest of your security strategy. And so, that's a conversation that we've had to have a lot more over the past 2 or 3 years, especially as everything has gone remote. But it's a huge overarching, governance to anything that you put in place for your end users.
Yep. And at the end of the day, it's not if, it's when. You need to make sure you can prove to the people that are supposed to pay you the money back that you did all the appropriate things you could have done to make sure you prevented this.
Yeah, I don't. One thing to add here, though, is I don't know how many times we've run into situations where the customer, we're talking about security. Oh, we have antivirus on our desktops. We want to put that in VDI, or we have this EDR application in our desktops. We want to put that in VDI. Well, there's a lot of considerations that you need to take into account here when you start putting something like that in. If you're delivering a desktop, then those things can have an impact on the performance of that desktop. We need to secure it, and maybe that the tool that they've been using for 20 years is not the right tool to meet the security needs in VDI. I mean, in some cases they are, but these are considerations that need to be talked through with the client and the consultant to come to some sort of agreement on the approach that needs to be taken to address the risk.
So, Geremy, I'm going to give you the last one, but before you attack it, I'm going to change what it says. When I talk to a company about this one, I say it this way: current and future business expectations. And I'm really bullish on adding the future one in there, because you don't know what you don't know. Let's build something that might be conducive for what's coming. Go ahead.
What would we call this? Layer 8. So if we're talking about the OSI model, you've got layer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and this is layer 8. You know, sometimes these are political. At the end of the day, a lot of business decisions drive technology, right? So, I mean, DaaS is cool and everything, but what does that give you? And I think you've got to understand that. I mean, the reason you might be doing it is strictly security. So you might have some budget, but what might be driving this is a security, or it could be you're trying to reduce some spend somehow, right? Whatever that looks like. So someone might have decided that I can do DaaS as a service and reduce my spend somehow. I think this is where you need to understand, all right, do I have to consider cost per user for a desktop? You start thinking that from different perspectives. And then other times it's just, there's been a decision made. Andy has seen this, Bill has seen this, is we are going to the cloud. So there's been some strategic decision.
No, we're going to the cloud, damn it.
Yes.
Okay.
And so we are going to the cloud. And, whether or not it makes sense from a cost or technology perspective, someone within the business has said, this is what we're doing. And so you have to consider that as well. So having said all that, you have to consider things that aren't technology related driving what your project is doing. And it's important to understand that, because at the end of the day, this is what gets the budget, is this piece right here, whatever it is you're trying to do.
How about mergers and acquisitions? We got customers who have built themselves so they could be acquired using the technology to make that easier and more likely and more lucrative. At the same time, we have companies that do the acquiring, that's building their platform so they can acquire companies.
Yep.
That's right. I don't think this list was necessarily in order, but I think generally speaking, this expectation section would be the first part of the discussion I would have with a customer. In fact, in our typical methodology, this section around understanding business needs and requirements, et cetera, stakeholders, that's typically first, since it drives a lot of what comes after.
Yep.
So I will highlight something for this needs to be done in a meaningful way. It needs to be documented. It needs to be signed off on by the company or whoever you're doing the project for before you move in. If you just make the assumptions that you got it right without reviewing it with them and having them sign off, there's really no accountability, and chances are you missed something, if not a lot.
That's absolutely right. And this is why we produce a design. I kind of liken this. I think this is an apt analogy, but I kind of liken this to building your own custom house, or having a builder build your own custom house. You have someone come in and put together a blueprint, right? Kind of lays out what kind of windows you're going to have, what kind of countertops, what your appliance is going to be, et cetera. You don't just tell a guy, I want you to build me a house now, and he just goes in and builds it to his own desire, his own likes. You want it built to customized to your requirements. And this, how you do that is typically some sort of iterative process you go through to get to the point where you produce something that drives that. And that's what we're talking about here, is documenting all of this such that when the actual environment is built, it's built according to something we all agree on.
Yeah.
So there's two kinds of POCs that I have done in the past. The first one has been, let's build it and see who comes. And I can promise you that those are rarely successful. So usually when we're talking with an organization and they're interested in sort of testing out a solution, we go through this list here to really understand just how vetted out this project is. Have you defined some of these use cases? Do you understand really what we're building for? And if you can't answer a lot of these questions, we'll kind of hold off doing any sort of proof or pilot, because it's typically not worth anyone's time yet to start standing things up. So, we'll wait and go, hey, let's start vetting some of these pieces out. And maybe 50% of the time we do, 50% of the time we don't. But ultimately, once you understand what you're building for, the process goes so much smoother. because you know exactly what you're designing for and what you're trying to build. It's a big deal.
And here's the truth of all that. You're still going to get it wrong, but it won't be because you didn't do stuff to kind of get aligned on the front end. Hopefully you didn't get it as wrong as you would have, and you still could, but we all need to hold ourselves accountable for doing the best we can. If we have to reboot, we reboot.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that happens, and you document it, and you move in the new direction based on what you discovered during the process. So I don't think that's unusual, and it's expected, to Andy's point, that we will get some of it wrong.
Yep.
All right, Geremy, diligent analysis of meaningful insights. That's consulting jargon, and I don't know what it means. What does it mean?
So here's what I would say. So you put a solution in place. Like, how do you define success? Like, how do you know this was successful and it was useful and you're getting out of it what you expect? You know, you've got to build in metrics and insights into your solution to gather that data and put that into, you know, folks who can help make that decision. So for instance, you put these desktops out, you were building for a disaster recovery strategy. You know, did you test it at all? Do you know how that works? Or did you build this to help improve the end user experience? Like, what metrics are you gathering to be able to find that it's better or worse than it was, right? Or better yet, how do you gather the insight so you can continually iterate and make it better, right? So if you understand that, you know, your first version of this was okay, but it could perform better, you know, maybe you've overloaded your machines, you know, being able to grab those metrics so you can feed that back in and go, hey, you know what, we need less people per host, or, you know, maybe we need to resize the instances we had in our cloud, whatever. You know, this has to be iterative. You don't put DaaS out there and then just walk away. You have to continually, you know, take a look at it, understand it, you know, how is it performing based on what you were trying to do, and continually improve. That's a life lesson. That's what just happened.
Yeah, for sure. Bill, your thoughts on this part?
No, I agree completely. This is part of making sure you deliver what the customer desires. And I would add, in terms of, you know, it's one thing to collect a lot of data and analyze it and determine based on the data how the solution is performing. But I think to Jeremy's point, one of the key metrics here, which is often not easily achievable short of interviewing an end user, is really understanding what the end user's opinion is of the solution. In other words, how do they feel about it? How is it performing from their perspective? Granted, that's a very subjective determination, whereas what we're talking about here is more objective information, but that's critical to success as well, because we could look at the objective detail and all the insights and all the data, and it looks like it should be performing well and it's doing what it's supposed to do. But if the user doesn't like it, it's not going to be a success in all likelihood. So you need to evaluate the user themselves and their opinions as a part of this, which I think is really what this is saying in a roundabout way.
Yeah, perception is reality.
Absolutely.
So it would be easy to say, hey, spin up the Citrix monitoring tools and gather data. Right. And you could do that. And there are certainly things that you could pull from that, either from performance or security analytics. But I mean, some of your metrics are things like support tickets. You know, have your support tickets gone up after you rolled out DaaS? It could be from any number of third-party solutions as well. Just understand that, you know, you need to gather pieces from all over to help give you sort of a broader look at really how everything's performing.
Well, somebody, it might have been Microsoft years ago, did a study on how many times a user would click on an error button, the OK on an error button, before they would call support. And it was like 3 or 4 times. If they'd click on it, I think it was 4 times. If they would click on it 4 times, and the application would work and function, there'd never be a support ticket. But that user's perception of that environment may be skewed by that experience. Well, if you had to click it a 5th time, they would call support and then it would get resolved. But often users will just move on through the issue and just simply accept it as the cost of working in the environment. But it does often result in a negative perception.
And I'll use that moment to talk about things we're doing here to invest further in that around like ServiceNow and other real-time data technologies where, you know, ITSM becomes a natural flow. When an issue pops up, it can just kind of happen without having to make that dreaded support phone call. Because I'm like every other user. I go find a different way. I'd be dang if I want to have to call a support desk and deal with that madness.
By the way, I noticed there's an update for the ITMS adapter on the left there, Andy. So maybe for a future blog post. There.
Blog. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I just got back from the ServiceNow conference. I'm so excited about opportunities to take all of our different technologies and bring them together. We're going to crush it. All right. Realizable transformation strategy. Here's the one thing I want to say, and then Bill, I'll come to you on this. Digital transformation is happening. It will never end. I will be dead before it's over, and it will keep going for generations after that. Your digital workspace strategy you put in place better be ready to go with it. And you better be ready for it to adapt without having to redo it over and over and over again. Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this section that you've got highlighted, realizable transformation strategy, is really kind of an augment or an addition to the section Geremy talked about. This is really about taking the insights and making decisions and optimizing your strategy for it, and then delivering the right types of recommendations to stakeholders. So this is really an outgrowth of the prior one. It's obviously critical in making sure that that you take the data you have and help the organization act on that data and understand it and what it means to them, from the standpoint of how the environment is performing or what needs to be improved. It could be things like they need to add hosts or they need to add capacity in order to really be able to make the solution transform their business.
Yep. Geremy, you have to see it all the time. You talk to a customer today, and a year later or whatever, new employee later, new CIO later. Mm-hmm. Transformation thoughts around what was going to be the meaning of success evolved.
I mean, your goals are going to change, but I mean, I think this is DevOps 101, right? So yep. You've got to be able to take the feedback in process and just constantly, loop it back in. This is yep. an iterative process. So you will never get this perfect, but you should always be striving for perfect is really what it is.
Well, and you should dot your I's, cross your T's, and realize it's going to be wrong. And if we get it wrong, we'll do it. We'll change. We'll adapt.
Yep.
I had a real life experience I'll share with you real quick where I got on a bus. Yeah. I took a public transportation trying to get to a meeting the other week. I had time. I had things going on. I just jumped on a bus. Well, about 10 minutes later, I realized the bus was the right bus, but going the wrong direction. I just got off and went back the other way. It's okay.
You know what? You fail early on that. You don't wait until you get halfway through the trip before you decide to do it. You go, all right, we're going the wrong way. Let's get off the bus.
When you realize it's the wrong way, whether it's 2 minutes into it or 2 years into it, you adapt.
Man, there's a social psychology conversation we could be having right now, but we'll skip it for right now. Yeah, that's a very good point.
All right, so I'll hit this next one. It's a mature, flexible technology. I think what we're really talking about here is Citrix because it has scars on its mm-hmm. knuckles. Going back to my example, I drilled 2 holes in my fingers yesterday. The second time I had told myself, don't do that again, and then I did it again. Scars on your knuckles, experience, mm-hmm. community, lots of technology, accomplishments. Citrix and the digital workspace space, specifically around DaaS, but digital workspace in general. These 30 plus years of solutions and evolution means that everything we talked about so far, if you had to go do a project right now using one technology for a desktop as a service offering, you're going to pick Citrix. Doesn't mean it's the only one that would work, but it's the one that has most likely what you need. Geremy, go ahead.
I would agree with that. I mean, it's flexible. It covers all your bases. And I think the biggest thing is the bases that it doesn't cover. So maybe we don't cover all of them. We realize you're going to bring to the table things that aren't Citrix. And the other, guiding principle here is, integration as well. So, we can integrate with just about everything as well, which is important.
Bill, your thoughts on what you've seen happen over the last 30 years of Citrix?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would agree with that being the solution, Citrix being the solution in a majority of cases, and not the only solution, but certainly the direction. That's why I picked it as the one that I wanted to kind of base my career on many years ago. But this section, the key thing of this section, in my view, is the second to last paragraph. And this is, I harp on this all the time. You need to provide a technology, or if you're providing a technology where the users spend the most of their time, it needs to meet their requirements and improve their lives, improve the experience needs to be solid, and it needs to improve their work, allow them to do work easier, more efficiently, and from anywhere, among many other factors.
Yeah. And one of the factors might be, hey, you can't afford Citrix. Citrix, there's ways to buy it, right? But in some cases it might be you can't afford this. Let's look at other alternatives. But
right.
You're looking for the one that checks all the boxes, gets you future-proofed. Citrix and maybe others, but certainly Citrix is going to be the one that's going to have most of the check boxes checked if the box is capable of being checked.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, guys. If you're listening to this, reach out to us. You reach out to WePro, reach out to a partner evaluate that partner. My statement to everybody, and this gets in trouble every once in a while, is reach out to a couple partners. Doesn't have to be XenTegra. Reach out to a couple and take the advice and see if you can blend them all together to come up with what's right for you. And one of the nice things about today's world, Geremy and his team are part of the partner ecosystem now. You're getting Citrix. And if you're talking to a partner, they don't have to bring Citrix to the table with them. Ask them to bring them to the table with them because they're supposed to be there these days. You, Mr. Customer, deserve the best of both, which means bringing multiple partners and the vendor to the table. And then from there, we'll see where we can go following the right approach. And that's been my message forever and ever and ever. Geremy, thanks for the time. Anything we didn't cover here that you want to make sure we leave our listeners with?
No, this is good. This is great. I'll double down on finding a good partner for sure, because I think there's so much around Citrix that involves not Citrix. And I think you just need someone who can step in and help, just pull the solution together for you.
Yeah. Bill, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with Geremy. There's definitely, a Citrix environment. Building a Citrix environment is not for the faint of heart. It's not necessarily overly difficult, but it requires some specialization and knowledge of pieces and parts that are not Citrix, Active Directory, group policies, other elements. And, you want to make sure when you pick a partner that you're sure that they have that requisite knowledge in Citrix, but also understand how it fits into the overall environment to ensure success.
Bill, how many projects have you done that failed because of Citrix?
I don't think I've had any that failed because of Citrix.
How many failed because of some other ecosystem?
Oh, absolutely.
Happen.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we've had some, and we've had those where there were exceeding challenges that were caused by another environment or another part of the environment or another product that we were able to resolve. But it took a lot of effort on our part and the part of the customer and some pain, which certainly blemished the overall solution at the start. But ultimately, in most cases, we come out of it fine. But it's a hard experience it's a hard lesson to learn, I guess.
Well, and I'll go back to the title of this blog, Desktop as a Service Environment. It's a combination of lots of philosophical and other methodologies and products, human interaction. It takes a lot.
It does.
Good and always working towards getting it right or better.
Yep.
Gentlemen, thank you for the time.
Excellent. It's good to be back.
Yeah, it is.
We'll have to get Todd back on. I saw online the other day he has a new role, I think. We'll ask him about it when we get back, when he comes and joins us again. All right, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.